Hello, I'm back again for a lecture that's not a lecture. I'm talking about Buddhism. This is October and I'm reflecting on Buddhism all this month. And I've given 2 talks already. The little Buddha corner, I use the title because there's a little corner of my studio shed in the hills above Loch Allen where I have a little Buddha shrine. And to be honest, I'm in Donegal at the moment because I work here most of the week. And I have a little Buddha shrine here too. And I have in front of me a book called The Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. And that is the extraordinary book that holds the Lamrim teachings, used by the Dalai Lama, used by the Panchen Utral Rinpoche over in Bonboy and Cavan. The Lamrim teachings are what I'm sharing with you. I'm not sharing the teachings with you, I'm sharing my understanding, my limited understanding of those teachings. And so I'm not sharing with you ideas, I'm sharing with you my enthusiasm for all things Buddhist. And I'm mostly sharing with you a sense of the joy that it gave me in my life, the way that I really think that Buddhism was the psychotherapy that helped me transform myself. It helped me to deal with disturbing emotions, with stuff that would be coming from the unconscious, with stuff that would be, maybe traumas in childhood and then things triggering that trauma unconsciously and sort of living out like having a complex about something, having a whole kind of cluster or constellation of kind of unhealthy, unconscious, disturbing emotions and them all focused maybe on some sort of image or figurehead manifesting in my life endlessly, and all that negativity of just disturbed psychological energy. What is called in Buddhism disturbing emotion. And we all have it. Like, we're all human. And it's like at some stage in my life, it was getting the better of me, and I was in just about 40 years of age, and it so happened there was a Tibetan Lama who was 22 miles away, and I went over to his centre and I took refuge in him. That just meant that I was going in a committed way. It's an interesting thing about Buddhism that it's like you need to commit. You can't work it out in your head. And I feel that's the same with Christianity as well. But I'm not going to talk Christianity now. We're just going to think Buddhism for a while. And what I've been saying up to now, I was talking about like the physicality of it. That, the gestures you make, the kind of sense of how you express, let's say, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. They're the 3 things, the 3 jewels that you take refuge in. And you take refuge with your body, your speech and your mind. And you do it physically. And the way you do it physically is, number 1, you go get a teacher. When you cross that threshold, be very careful which threshold it is. There's lots of people who might be teaching Buddhism and they're not really capable of it. It's the same in psychotherapy, it's the same in education, it's the same, I think, in everything nowadays, because there's so much information and so much available that there's been an explosion of sort of knowledge. But people have begun to use it and misuse it, and so you can walk across the threshold of the wrong door and get misguided. And even if you go back to John of the Cross, he'd be warning people, do not go to a spiritual director who does not have the maps for where you want to go. Because he'll misguide you, and not only will you not be directed properly, you'll be misdirected. And that can be a real problem. And it's such a huge, big idea to go to a teacher. It's why traditional religions make sense to me. Because there's a tradition. You know, so if I go to some individual on the internet who might, say that he was a teacher of Buddhist practice, I don't know anything. It's the blind just walking out there in a very vulnerable way, and maybe he's blind or she's blind too. But if I go to the Panchaneutral Rinpoche, who happened to be living in Cavan, that's the only reason I went, but if I go there, I know immediately that, he has a Geshe degree, he's studied philosophy, he's been within the monastic system of Tibet, he's lived in India, taught in India, he's a friend of the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama actually asked him to go to Mongolia in the early 90s when the Soviet system had collapsed, to go there and help reconstruct Mongolian Buddhism. Because in Mongolia, at one stage, if you went back 200 years, they had libraries, they had, rooms and rooms that you could fill the shelves with philosophy written by Mongolian monks and philosophers. And that all changed and was kind of devastated by the Soviet period for 70 years. And then there was a period of reconstruction. And in that time, early 90s, the Panchaneutral Rinpoche started to go because the Dalai Lama had requested him to go. And he has a centre in Ulaanbaatar. Now, I was there with him on his first trip, and it was amazing and uplifting and astonishing. And it was just like 9 of us in 2 jeeps wandering across 2,000 miles of Mongolia looking for old monasteries. It was an extraordinary experience, and it was for me like a deep retreat. But now it's different. Now there is a centre that the Panchaneutral Rinpoche runs in Ulaanbaatar. You'll get it on the internet if you go to the Jampaling website. And it's wonderful, I mean, it's like, it's an uplifting thing to see how that particular man works and lives and how gentle and humble and silent he is. However, I'm only bringing in this to the conversation to remind you of what I was saying in the previous talk. And that is, when you get a teacher, be very careful to get a teacher that doesn't misguide you. And what I say is that the way I experience doing that is go to the source, Go to a main source. And therefore, when I went over to Jampaling for the first time and I wanted to connect with Rinpoche for the first time, I had no worries like, is this the right shop to be in? This is the right shop. If it's there as the central kind of energy of Tibetan Buddhism for 1,000 years, since Atisha, that's a long time, and has transferred to India because of the invasion by China, and then accidentally, but as a consequence of that, all that Tibetan wisdom and philosophy begins to flow out across the entire globe because of the scattering of lamas, teachers, philosophers. As refugees, then they end up in Europe and America and Ireland, and we benefit from that. And it used to amaze me that somebody who had, been in the rigorous tradition of philosophy in Tibet, was there beside me, sitting on the couch beside me, in the middle of Cavan, And I really used to think every time I went in and out the gate of Jampeling, which is near Bonboy, it's a big old country house, and I would drive in thinking, this is amazing that I'm here. This is amazing that I can get access to such a person. Now, when I took refuge in that teacher, I would have done a little ritual. There would have been a ritual where you'd prostrate yourself in front of him, and you would, take refuge. Taking refuge in the three jewels, you take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And you're using your body, your speech, and your mind to take refuge in these things. And he's sitting there, and I'm doing my prostration for the very first time ever this is happening. This is it's like a ritual. It's like a rite of passage to say that I am bowing down before the Buddha. I'm bowing down before the Dharma. The Dharma is the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality, whatever is the nature of reality in its ultimate, whether we know what it is or not, but let us say that is the ultimate. And the Dharma is what we follow. So an example of it would be, all our desires and all the things we dislike, the disturbing emotions, they're all they're what I think I am. I think I am an angry person. I think I am a person who, is always wanting stuff. And we erroneously say that this is who I am. I am a person, and these are my traits. And Buddhist view is that those are actually just like clouds in the sky, but the ultimate reality, the sky, the emptiness of your conscious being present has no such desires or negative or disturbing emotions. It is the infinite place of pure peace, pure enlightenment, pure compassion, pure and unlimited. To believe almost cosmically that there is this space, there is this ground of being, is one way of putting it. I saw a beautiful way of putting it recently. Cynthia Bourgeau, she described it like the rainbow of all experience and the rainbow of all cosmic manifestation and incarnation of being is like a rainbow around a center. And it's emanating, it's coming out of a kind of a great white light at the center. And that was her way of kind of describing God, if you like, as Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. It's to describe everything around it like in a circle, in a cyclical kind of spin. Well, in Buddhism, it's the same enlightened being. The only difference in emphasis is that this same reality is being deduced not by revelation, not by sacred scriptures, not by the belief in the holy word of God, but it's being deduced by reason and rational and logic. That's the Buddhist pathway. To test certain logical things, and this is the conclusion you will come to. And maybe the other difference of emphasis is that in Buddhism there's a real sense that you're talking about, the Buddha within. It's like the Buddha is everywhere, and there is only one Buddha. Now that's true, but also in the world of imagining every individual is a Buddha. And sometimes they talk about like 1,000 million Buddhas on the top of a leaf. Or as many Buddhas as there are stars. Or maybe that in all the stars in the infinity of the universe, each one contains 1,000,000 planets, and on each planet there are 1,000 million leaves, and on every leaf there is 1,000 million Buddhas. So you can see the way in Buddhism, the sense of that image we have of the Buddha manifesting as human in the lotus position with the hands joined in the meditation mudra, that image is like, we can imagine many, or we can imagine that's the actual interior infrastructure of our own soul. And everything else is ignorance. Everything else is false. Like the idea that's disturbing emotion is you. That's the wrong, false idea that can only be described from a Buddhist point of view as ignorance. Our sense and our perception of things as real is ignorance. And the Dharma, the perceptions, the Buddhist insight into reality is the Dharma, and it releases you from ignorance. And of course, if you release yourself from ignorance, supposing you say that you have a desire to eat too many chicken breasts, so you're gluttonous, but you tell yourself you're the kind of person who eats chicken breasts with chips and a Coca-Cola in Supermax. This is who I am, this is what I do. And you need it, and you grasp it, and you take it, and sometimes you, as they say, you wolf it down. Well, the reason why you keep doing it compulsively is because you, in some sense, understand that that's true, that that is who you are. So when you start thinking in a Buddhist way, you're contemplating the fact that, number one, everything is empty. And that's to say that there's an interdependence from one thing to another, which makes it impossible to draw a line around your body and say, that is you, you are an individual. And it's impossible to find the bit that you say is you in any part of your body. You might examine your head, your eyes, your nose, your arse, your legs, whatever, and you could think none of those actual parts is me. But what is me? And then you start thinking, maybe what is me today, and why is it that somebody tells me you were in a very bad mood yesterday and you said such and such and I was very hurt, and you're thinking, I don't remember saying that. Did I say that? I'm not that kind of person. And it's like, you don't know who you were yesterday. You don't know who you'll be tomorrow. And then there are people who you don't like, and you kind of lock your mind into a sense of, I can't stand that fella. And it's absolutely like etched in stone on your heart. I don't like that guy. But you meet him accidentally at a social situation where you're nervous and you're intimidated by all the other people in the room, and this particular guy that you don't like comes over to you and he welcomes you and he makes a big thing of you and he introduces you to everybody, and you go home thinking, he's a nice guy, I like him, I was wrong about him, And in even deeper ways, even much deeper ways, your enemy can become your friend. It happens. It happens all the time. It also happens that your friend becomes your enemy. Somebody who's really, really close and you love deeply, and then they say something that you feel undermines your integrity, undermines your confidence. And it's like that's it. You resolve and you etch it in stone in your heart. I'll never have anything to do with that fecker again. But even when you change a friend into an enemy, it still shows the truth that either enemy or friend is not permanent. They're interchangeable. Friend can become enemy. Ergo, therefore, enemy can become friend and often does. And you can become friend to your enemy. So that all is the kind of stuff that Buddhists talk about when they're talking about the Dharma. What I'm saying is that I go to the Panchen Utral Rinpoche and I take refuge in him. I am going to prostrate and express this refuge that I want to take in him. And taking refuge in the teacher is really, some people would say, more important than taking refuge in anything else, is primarily the teacher. Because he is therefore the emanation of the Buddha. I will treat him like the Buddha. I will practice. It's like a blessing, because now I have somebody that I can kind of feel is like a manifestation of the Buddha. And if you're very, very blessed to get in contact with somebody like a High Lama, like somebody like the Rinpoche down in West Cavan, well, you're dealing with somebody who is within the structure of the Gelugpa school of Tibetan Buddhism. You're dealing with a very high professor, if you like. Somebody who is considered revered. And when you take refuge in the teacher, you're saying, well, I take him like as the Buddha. Even though he may not behave like the Buddha. You might get a teacher who is as human as yourself, or who smokes cigarettes, or who loves steak, medium rare. When you meet a manifestation of the Buddha, it's not like you're meeting some exotic being that you put on a pedestal as better than you, because that usually ends in tears. When you put it happened in Ireland a lot in the past 50 years, where, priests who had been put on pedestals got really seriously knocked off their pedestals for bad behaviour. So it's important that in some way, when you're dealing with a teacher and you kind of acknowledge them as a manifestation of the Buddha, you're going to refuge to them. That's how you're going to access the sense of the Buddha presence within yourself. And the biggest way that I felt that would happen with somebody like Rinpoche is simply being in their company. Wasn't even anything he said. If you're in the company of somebody who's a great meditator, because the human being is such a mimic, because we mimic people, it is the way we learn. And just put yourself in the company of somebody wise, you will begin to have realizations. You'll begin to have wisdom. If you put yourself in the company of somebody who is a great, yogic, like a physical meditator, their mindfulness will begin to impinge on your distracted mind, and you will end up being more focused in your mind. And it's not magic, it's simply a fact that we are mimics. And if the person beside you is still and calm, abiding, and single-pointed in the way they sit and breathe, and they're just sitting on a sofa, and you're sitting beside them on the armchair, well, you will imbibe, you'll begin to mimic them. Even your mind will unconsciously mimic them. And then the final thing that you take refuge in the Buddha and in the Dharma and in the Sangha. And the Sangha constitutes those who have overcome ignorance and are consequently totally reliable and secure. So, it's probably why I talk always about trying to find a mainline place, whether it be Christian, Islamic, Jewish, Buddhist, whatever. Go to the sort of the main store. It's like if you're shopping, go to the main store. And you'll find that because it's the main store is most reliable. And in Buddhist terms, or in any religious terms, if a community of people, a large community of people, are practicing in a particular way for a long time, and not just a couple of years, but 1,000 years, then you can really trust that system. You can really trust that system. And you find a teacher and you take refuge in the teacher. And you're taking refuge, as I said, there's a physical side to it in my personal story. So, one day, and it was 6 months, I was going to Jambaling for 6 months before the Rinpoche actually returned from India. So I had to wait that time. But I was doing classes. I was learning how to meditate in the Buddhist tradition. Marjorie Cross was given the lessons every Tuesday afternoon or something. And that was going on. Then your man came back and I took refuge in him, a little ceremony. And I was so excited because it was almost like my ordination as a Christian priest. Now that was a huge event. That was a life-changing event because I was saying that I'm going to live the rest of my life within the context of this promise. And be ordination. And in a small way, the Buddhist thing was the same. Now, the reason why I'm saying all this is because I don't expect you to get ordained as a Catholic priest, and I don't expect you to start taking refuge in some big Rinpoche that you find down the street. But I'll tell you why I'm sharing this with you. This is just my personal story, and this whole podcast is about me sharing my story. It's not about me teaching, me passing on ideas, nothing to do with that. It's me sharing my story, and I'll tell you why I'm doing this. I want to kind of share with you what it is to take refuge, what it is to go through a ritual that is physical and it's expressing some kind of promise. Where you're saying something that says, I am going to rely on you. And you're embodying it, you're allowing it out into the open. You do it when you get married. You promise your life to somebody else. You also do it sometimes when you bring a gift to somebody. Let's say you had a disagreement. Let's say you bring flowers. you present the flowers, you say, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. You're making a promise, but you're ritualizing it. And it's when you express your intention in a ritual, you multiply the power and effect of whatever the thing is you're doing. I mentioned this in the previous talk. Do you remember where I was given the example of handing a cup of tea to somebody, and the Rinpoche would say, in the West you just use one hand, but if you use two hands, if you make a full ritual gesture, you can feel that you're embodying more deeply the intention, the sense of I'm giving you this gift. If your body is fully involved in it, you feel the intention deeper. So, if you have an intention, let's say to do some Buddhist meditation once a day, or let's say that you want to just forget the meditation, because meditation is simply becoming familiar with something. So you don't have to be sitting, doing single-pointed stuff to be meditating. You can be meditating by just practicing ahimsa, practicing non-violence, practicing the idea that you will never say an angry word to anybody, a negative word, never, because it's violence. It's violence of speech, and you say that. Now, you could practice that for 3 or 4 days, and you'd find immediately there were places where you feel challenged, and maybe you succeed, maybe you win, maybe you do well, and it would be to your credit, and that would be brilliant. But what if you began by sitting in front of an image of the Buddha, and with the understanding that the Buddha image represents the enlightened mind in your own heart, and let's say that you then said a prayer of dedication, meaning some words that said, I will not use violent language for the next 3 days, in order that I might become closer to the awakened Buddha within me. Now, your non-violence will be more powerful. It will have a deeper effect on you by virtue of the fact that you have not just even named what you're going to do as an intention, but you have embodied the intention. You've spoken the intention. You've made a prayer. And that's what in Tibetan Buddhism they would talk about as a dedication. And they're always talking about dedication. You'd see it if you read any Buddhist book, there's always starts with a dedication. And the main prayers that you say in Tibetan Buddhism, they always begin with a dedication. But it's still very close to what we used to do in the old days, like we'd have what's called the morning offering. And the morning offering was, I'll try and remember it, I don't know if I can. Oh my God, I offer to thee my body, mind, heart, body and mind and soul for this day. I can't say it, I can't remember it, but I know that there was a morning offering where you kind of offered all your good energy, all your good intentions for the benefit of other people for the day. Well, folks, that is Buddhist. That is absolutely a deep heart of Buddhism. And I suppose what I'm trying to share with you is my experience, but my experiences of finding simple ways to do things. Because I'm not an academic and I'm not scholarly, and I find simple ways to do things. And one of the simple ways, one of the most powerful ways, is this idea of taking refuge or dedication, where you focus on the intention you have to do good before you do the good. and where you embody that good intention in the context of a Buddhist ritual. It's very, very simple. It's like you have a Buddhist image, a Buddha, a picture, whatever it is. It's there in front of you. You light a candle and you say, I will not use violent language today in order to awaken more deeply to my Buddha mind. And the Buddha statue that's in front of you and the little candle reflects a sense of recognizing the embodied reality of Buddha, that in the cosmic world that is incarnated around us, there is manifestation of Buddha. And by saying it and embodying it as an intention to do good, you're recognizing that what the Buddha statue represents out there and you're looking at is actually also inside in you. It's part of you. It's the Christ in you, if you like. You're awakening to that. But you're doing it by a ritual. You're doing it by a prayer. You're doing it by expressing an intention. I give you an example. Like the very start of any yoga or prayer, puja in Tibetan Buddhism, always begins with I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential that I create by practicing generosity and the other far-reaching attitudes, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. And you'll see that at the end of the prayer, may I attain Buddhahood, not for myself, not to escape the torments of another bad reincarnation or the hell realms, if there be such things. No. That would be called the Hinayana, the kind of medium scope intention in Buddhism is to find enlightenment. But what they call the Mahayana, the greater scope, not that it's better, but it's a different strategy. It is the strategy to live life in a better way in order to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Now that really puts you in a different picture. That means that you're not practicing Buddhism, mindfulness, meditation, compassion, forgiveness, non-violence. You're not practicing them to improve yourself. You're practicing them for the guy who works in the shop that you don't know. You're practicing it for him and for her. You're developing the wish that all sentient beings would find enlightenment. You're taking upon yourself the journey that you will find enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then what they call the bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a kind of a really high being. A really high being, but they're all around us. And you know, you don't have to even... The wonderful thing about Buddhism is that it recognizes the fact that the deep and greatest Buddhists and the deep and greatest Christians aren't necessarily the people who even espouse Christianity or Buddhism. They may not be people who have any religion. They may be just human beings, sentient beings who are out there in the world living their life, and they're not religious at all. And yet you can recognize them as Christ-like, and you can recognize them as bodhisattvas. that they live for other people. That the strength of their dedication to other people is enormous. It's very lucky if you have people like that around you. I have to say that, if you look around you for those people, sometimes you will recognize them where up until that moment you hadn't recognized them. And then you begin to look at the people around you and you begin to think, I didn't realize I was so blessed. And that sometimes happens when there's been an accident, or when, people are forced to separate or whatever. And they look back and they say, I didn't realize how blessed I was when I was living there with all the good people that were around me. And sometimes to look for the good people around you, to just contemplate in your neighbours. You may be dealing with what the Buddhists would call bodhisattvas. People whose intention is really, it can only be put in terms that are Buddhist, even though that wouldn't make sense to that next door neighbour, because they wouldn't be Buddhist. But in Buddhist terms, it is the bodhisattva is somebody who is trying to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And not just humans, but the cat and the dog and the spider, the whole lot of them. The whole lot of them. So that's a very beautiful. I'll say the little dedication again. This is how you begin everything in Tibetan Buddhism. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential that I create by practicing generosity and the other far-reaching attitudes, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. Generosity. The way it says there, practice generosity. And the other far-reaching attitudes. Right? That you cultivate attitudes that is beneficial to other people. Now, why do you do this? Again, the wonderful way that Buddhism works is it has a kind of a rational and logical foundation, because you practice these things because they're good for you. They're good for you. They benefit. You will feel better. And as I was saying yesterday, you'll find you have more friends. If you don't use violent language, if you absolutely don't use violent language, more people will like you, more people will listen to what you've got to say, and you will have more friends. And how do you actually avoid violent language? It's not by, you don't have to sort of make yourself into a goody person. You don't have to sort of concoct soft, sweet, positive phrases to use with everybody. It's not about that. It's about non-violence. It's about ahimsa, which is simply stop. Don't rationalize, don't analyze, don't be telling yourself, well, I do have to tell that fecker that he's a bad whatever. Or he hurt me, so I need to hurt him, and that's the law. No, just stop. Well, I'll stop when I've said this. I just want to say one more thing. No, don't. Stop. Silence yourself. You're not going to say anything negative. You will find just that one single thing. Forget even the actions, forget even the other two levels of non-violence, which are, in the mind and in the body, but just in the speech. You just stop using violent language, abusive language, language that kind of pushes into other people's faces, language that tries to control the social situation or the personal situation. You just stop using that what happens? The first thing that happens is there's a gap, there's kind of a silence. But very quickly the silence fills with alternatives. And you realize that you were a much nicer person than you thought. You realize that the person you thought you were, ranting, was actually a delusion. You're not that person. You can stop it like at the click of your fingers, and now you're a different person. You're wiser. And you start to have what I think they call realizations. It's not like insights, it's not like learning something. It's like seeing the world from a different point of view is about the best way I could put it. And one of the things you realize is that the self, what you thought was yourself, is impermanent. It changes. And you can become a different person at the click of your fingers. And it's not complicated, it's simply non-violence. You do it with the speech, you do it with the body, obviously. I say obviously because I kind of nearly presume that, physical violence is less likely than verbal violence. And you also do it in your own mind. Hardest place to do it because I know that I can nurse a grudge about somebody for like weeks. Don't like that fella at all. And sometimes I even use politicians as sort of surrogates for my negativity, Sometimes I love watching politics. I love watching, what's her name, Liz Truss at the moment. And I know that I'm doing it to be negative. I know I'm indulging in negativity. She's a kind of a surrogate for everybody else that I don't like, and I can kind of sit there and look at her and say, what an idiot she is. And I know that that's transgressing. It's transgressing my intention to keep my mind free of violent energy. Body, speech and mind. Body, speech and mind say, I'm going to be non-violent. I'm not going to use aggressive words. I'm not going to speak negatively about somebody. I'm not going to indulge myself in thinking negatively about somebody. And I'm not going to obviously hit somebody. I suppose there is the cat and the dog to be thought about there too, because we can be physically violent in a kind of casual way to our animals and pets. Even just not feeding them when they're hungry and crying out to be fed. And you just, they become the surrogate for all your viciousness in relation to other people, Sit there, I'll feed you later. Stop whinging. So you can have a pet and then turn around and be negative to them. And so, body, speech, and mind. So get so used to that as a way of thinking about yourself. You're beginning to think about yourself now in physical terms that have their own metaphysics. It's an Asian way of doing it. It's different from what we do in the West. Body, speech, and mind. Take the top crown of your head and think body. Put your hands, join them underneath the chin, think speech. Put your hands joined on your chest, heart, think mind. Body, speech and mind. And look at the idea of making a physical prostration in front of an image of a Buddha. And think about what would it be like if you found a teacher. So many different levels at which you can find a teacher, but you find a teacher. What would it be like then if you took refuge in the teacher? That would intensify the intention to think about Buddhist practice, to take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So it's like there's 9 combinations. You're taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha with your body, speech, and mind. And you can go through those. Your body, taking refuge in the Buddha. Thinking about the form of your body, manifesting the form of the Buddha. Your speech, following the speech of the Buddha. Mind, ultimately, your mind awakening, opening, allowing all the ignorance of disturbing emotion and identities that are disturbed and that you think are permanent things called yourself, and letting it all fall away and just being there, which is being here now, which is what I talk about all the time. It's being here now. And so body, speech and mind, you take refuge in the Buddha, and then the same in the Dharma and the same in the Sangha. You find a teacher and you make an intention. You look at the idea of intentionality is so important in Buddhism because it multiplies the strength and the power of your good deeds. Your good deeds, if they're just accidental, they're great, but they're not half as powerful as if the intention behind them is to do the deed. I will do this. I will cook this meal so that my beloved will enjoy it. I will give this money to this charity that they may be able to help the poor. When you put the intention behind it before you do it, it has more power than, where you just automatically, you happen to be beside a big bucket that says, please donate to this charity, and you put your £5 in, €5. If you get up in the morning and say, this morning I'm going to give £5, €5, you can see how old I am. I'm going to give €5 to a particular charity, so that it will benefit them not just in the material level, but that the material benefit will then help them get one tiny little step closer to enlightenment. And this will be an act of how I am living my life of generosity in order to benefit all sentient beings. You put intention in front of the action. It solidifies, it strengthens the action. Now, that I think is a summing up of where we've got to so far. And you might be thinking, well, this is a strange way this man is talking about Buddhism, and you'd be dead right, because this is my unique way of talking about the Lamrim teachings. So I'm not teaching. I'm really not teaching. I'm really sharing my experience of these teachings and how much I have experienced them as jewels in my life that have really changed and improved my life. What I'm noticing as I go into it is how vast the subject it is. God Almighty, it's huge, it's enormous, and I'm just scratching around with a few pebbles in the foothills of what is a mountain range of ideas, And 99% of them I can't understand. Don't understand. But I suppose I feel it's a strange podcast. I don't know where I'd be going with it. Today is actually Saturday the 15th of October, and it's the feast day of Saint Teresa of Avila. And I'm not mentioning her today because I'm trying to focus on the vastness of Buddha teachings during the month of October as like a kind of a preparation, knowing that I get more focused on November as being the month of the dead. In a way, it's going to draw me into meditations about Christian ideas to do with afterlife and heaven and where do we go when we die. So I thought it's going to be a really good thing to do in October, and I am enjoying it so much that I have done this extra podcast. I did number, I think it was number 3 yesterday. Or no, maybe it was number 2 yesterday, and this is number 3. So I hope you stick with it. As I say, it's just crazy vast. We're scratching around with a few pebbles in the foothills of vast mountains of wisdom. But maybe just the enthusiasm that we have here will trigger somebody somewhere who's listening to actually find a teacher and find the jewel of Tibetan Buddhist teachings, the Lamrim. Until I'm back again with you, which will be very soon, thank you for being here and enjoy your practice of ahimsa. Bye-bye.